Snow lay thick over the frozen gardens of Schönbrunn in the winter of 1874. Inside the palace, a child was placed in a cradle carved for dynasties. She was Maria Eleonora, daughter of Archduchess Elizabeth of Austria, herself a granddaughter of Emperor Francis I, and Duke Maximilian of Bavaria of the ancient Wittelsbachs line. Her birth was not only a moment of joy, but a transaction of power. Ministers spoke of a bridge between Vienna and Munich. Courtiers whispered that her small heartbeat would keep empires aligned. The baptism was staged with silver bowls and candlelight. Emperors and archdukes smiled with a pride that belonged less to family than to politics. She was named after ancestors whose portraits hung above her, reminders that children of her blood were not free to belong to themselves. Yet from the beginning, her presence unsettled expectations. Her face was delicate but bright, her eyes so sharp that tutors later confessed to fearing her gaze. Servants noticed how she could recall entire prayers after one hearing, and how her hands found notes on the clavichord with a certainty rare in a child. To Archduchess Elizabeth, she was a jewel, proof that sacrifice in marriage could yield beauty and brilliance. To Duke Maximilian, she was a token to be counted in treaties. But even as silk was wrapped around her, and crowns were promised in whispers, a shadow lingered. The physicians of Vienna moved quietly through the corridors. Among them Dr. Joseph Skoda, whose reputation was built on precision and discretion. He would be called more than once to examine the girl, and his notes would carry words that never reached the court bulletin. A flaw lay hidden not in her mind, which soared, but in her blood, which betrayed her. This is the story of Maria Eleonora, a princess born with grace and intellect yet marked by a secret that could undo a dynasty. Stay with us until the end to witness how brilliance and fragility collided behind palace walls, and subscribe to uncover more of the buried tragedies of royal blood. Winter pressed heavy upon Vienna in the year 1874 when the cry of a newborn broke through the silence of Schönbrunn. Archduchess Elizabeth of Austria, granddaughter of Emperor Francis I, had given birth to a daughter, the father. Duke Maximilian of Bavaria of the Wittelsbach house received the news as couriers carried word across the empire. From this union, two of Europe's most powerful lines were bound. Habsburg and Wittelsbach blood now mingled in a single child who was christened Maria Eleonora. Ministers whispered that this fragile infant was more than a daughter. She was a treaty clothed in lace, a living seal placed in a cradle of gold. The baptism was held in chambers heavy with incense. Priests lifted silver bowls. Courtiers brought gifts wrapped in silk, and foreign envoys recorded the details to send back to their kings. Elizabeth gazed at her child with tenderness that defied politics, while Maximilian stood with the stern pride of a man who had gained more than a daughter. The girl's name appeared on letters and in proclamations that spoke of harmony between Vienna and Munich. Her presence soothed uneasy borders and stilled the tongues of rival courts. For a time, Schönbrunn glowed with confidence. 2 winters later, unease began to stir. Maria Eleonora stumbled on a rug. What should have been a bruise that faded overnight deepened into a dark blot that spread across her skin. Days passed, yet the mark remained. A playful nip from a dog left blood that would not close. Nurses exchanged fearful glances as cloths turned red in their hands. Archduchess Elizabeth summoned the court physician. Dr. Joseph Skoda entered with his satchel, his eyes sharp but cautious. He examined the child in silence, touched the bruise, and pressed gently on the wound. The blood did not stop. He set down his pen, lifted it again, and then hesitated. To speak of weakness in Habsburg blood was no diagnosis. It was near treason. Elizabeth begged for clarity. Skoda lowered his voice until it was scarcely more than a breath. He spoke of delicacy, of fragility, of a condition that would shadow every day of the girl's life. He avoided naming the illness, for to utter it was to risk his own head. The chamber seemed to close in on itself as the truth settled. A child born to bind empires carried blood that could not heal. That night, Duke Maximilian convened his advisors. Franz von Nopce, steward of the palace, stood by the fire while ministers argued in whispers. To admit the truth would destroy every hope of alliance. To deny it might buy time. At last, Maximilian ordered silence. All records of the physician's words would be locked away. Maria Eleonora would be shielded from public view. Appearances at court would be brief, portraits delayed, contact controlled. The world would know only a symbol of unity. The flaw would remain hidden behind curtains drawn tight. From that winter onward, the child lived in two realms. To the empire, she was a promise wrapped in silk. To those within the palace, she was a secret guarded at the price of truth itself. Maria Eleonora grew into childhood within chambers that felt both splendid and narrow. By the age of 5, her steps were watched as closely as her lessons. Schönbrunn had celebrated her birth with bells, yet the palace soon became a cage of curtains and hushed voices. She was allowed into the gardens only under the closest supervision. Her movements measured as if each touch of the world might leave a mark too dangerous to explain. Within those boundaries, her mind revealed its unusual fire. Tutors tested her with Latin prayers, and she returned them with precision after a single hearing. French and Italian lessons turned into fluent exchanges that startled even seasoned instructors. At the clavichord, her small fingers moved with clarity, producing melodies that carried far down the corridors. Those who heard her whispered that the child possessed a gift beyond her years. Archduchess Elizabeth often lingered by the door, pride in her eyes shadowed by dread. For each display of brilliance was matched by the sight of skin bruised too easily, of blood that refused to close. Elizabeth once knelt by her daughter's bed, whispering a prayer through tears. Maria Eleonora reached out and pressed her mother's lips with a steady hand. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "Do not pray for me to be ordinary. Teach me instead to know the world." The words left Elizabeth shaken, for they carried the weight of understanding far beyond childhood. From that night, she began to fill the lessons with history, maps, and chronicles of empires. Maria absorbed them with hunger, her memory a treasury that seemed to defy her fragile body. Still, the danger of discovery hung heavy. One summer afternoon, she tripped near the fountain in the palace gardens. Her arm struck the stone and blood spread quickly across her gown. It was then that Anna Nahowski appeared. She was a Viennese woman whose closeness to Emperor Franz Joseph granted her unusual access to Schönbrunn. Though she held no title, she moved within its walls as one tolerated presence, often witnessing what others tried to conceal. Seeing the girl collapse, she tore linen from a nearby sheet and pressed it against the wound, her face pale with fear. Moments later, Count Franz von Nopce arrived, a Transylvanian noble. He served as steward of the palace, entrusted with guarding secrets that could never reach the streets of Vienna. His loyalty was stern and his manner cold. With a wave of his hand, he dismissed every servant within sight. Doors slammed shut, whispers were cut short, and the garden was emptied. Under his command, the stone was scrubbed, the stained linen hidden, and the incident erased before rumor could take root. That evening, Elizabeth held her daughter close. Maria Eleonora leaned against her, eyes still bright despite weakness in her body. She whispered with a clarity that cut deeper than the silence surrounding them. "If my steps must remain unseen, then let my thoughts travel farther than their voices can reach." Her words lived in the memory of those who heard them. To the outside world, she remained a promise wrapped in silk, shown briefly to envoys by candlelight. But in the hidden rooms of Schönbrunn, Maria Eleonora was already shaping herself into more than a pawn. She was a mind sharpened by confinement, a spirit aware that her brilliance was her only freedom. By the time Maria Eleonora approached her 12th year, the walls of Schönbrunn carried a new tension. Childhood could no longer conceal her. Foreign envoys asked for glimpses of the girl promised in letters, and the court understood that secrecy would not hold forever. Ministers whispered in chambers scented with ink and candle smoke. A marriage alliance was being weighed in capitals far beyond Vienna. Yet the truth of her body remained a peril that no treaty could bear. Her mother watched the preparations with dread. Dresses were fitted, tutors rehearsed her conversation, and portraits were discussed as if a single image could anchor the illusion of health. In public moments, Maria Eleonora appeared radiant, her mind swift and her words chosen with precision. Envoys left with smiles, carrying reports of a gifted princess whose presence reflected well on her lineage. Behind the curtains, though, blood still betrayed her with bruises and secret bandages. Dr. Eduard von Hofmann, the respected forensic physician, was now the guardian of her records. He sifted through Skoda's earlier notes and rewrote them in phrases stripped of alarm. Where the truth spoke of danger, he recorded delicacy. Where risk loomed, he described sensitivity. His ink became the shield that kept suspicion from spreading. Maria Eleonora sensed the performance unfolding around her. One evening she sat with her mother, the fire casting shadows across their faces. She whispered with steady calm, "They dress me for crowns, yet keep me from sunlight. Am I a daughter or a mask?" Elizabeth could not answer. She only held her child tighter, torn between pride and the terror of what might be uncovered. Count Franz von Nopce grew harsher in his duties. He directed servants with clipped commands, forbidding gossip, sealing corridors whenever Maria Eleonora left her chamber. Anna Nahowski, ever present in the margins of palace life, recorded scraps of what she saw. In her secret notebook, she wrote of a girl presented like a jewel, yet hidden like a sin. The pressure of politics thickened. Letters from foreign courts began to circle, each hinting at marriage but demanding evidence of health. Maximilian convened his advisors in silence. They spoke of alliances with Bourbon princes and Romanov heirs, but none dared to name the shadow that hung over the child. To confess it would be to unravel decades of ambition. To deny it required ever greater acts of concealment. The decision was made to maintain the mask, to let the girl's mind dazzle enough to distract from the weakness of her blood. Maria Eleonora understood more than they realized. In the solitude of her study, she traced maps with ink-stained fingers, whispering to herself, "If they make me a pawn, then I will learn to be the board." Her intellect sharpened in confinement. Her resolve deepened with every secret she carried. The empire believed it was hiding a flaw. In truth, it was nurturing a mind that saw through the veils laid around her. Maria Eleonora entered her 13th year with a mixture of brilliance and frailty that no disguise could conceal. Her mind grew sharper with each passing month, yet her body betrayed her more openly. Bruises appeared without cause, joints stiffened with pain, and nights were broken by restless hours when she could not find comfort. The palace pressed forward with its masquerade, arranging brief appearances and rehearsed encounters, but the truth seeped through the silence like ink through paper. Her tutors marveled at the depth of her memory. She spoke of ancient empires as if she had walked their halls. She solved mathematical puzzles that left scholars unsettled by her quickness. Yet when she rose from her chair, her steps faltered. A simple stumble left her leg darkened for weeks. Servants carried water mixed with herbs, whispered remedies passed down from generations, but nothing could still the blood beneath her skin. Dr. Eduard von Hofmann visited often, his presence always cloaked in discretion. He examined her with the care of a man who knew more than he dared to write. His official reports spoke of minor ailments, of sensitivities that would pass with age. In private, he adjusted his glasses, his face lined with unease. He advised the Archduchess to keep her daughter from strain, to protect her from even the smallest wound. Elizabeth listened in silence, her heart torn by the sight of a child whose intellect soared even as her body failed. Maria Eleonora herself understood what was happening. She no longer asked why she was kept from riding or playing with cousins. She accepted the restrictions, but turned them into fuel for her mind. At her desk, she covered page after page with sketches of maps, genealogies, and secret reflections. She once looked up from her work and spoke with quiet conviction. "If I cannot rule with strength of arm, then I will rule with strength of thought. They cannot take that from me." Elizabeth tried to hide her tears, kissing the girl's forehead, while her own fear grew heavier. Nights in the Archduchess's chamber were filled with prayer. Though she knew prayer would not alter the blood that bound them, she begged her daughter to rest. But Maria Eleonora resisted sleep, preferring to read by candlelight until exhaustion forced her eyes closed. Outside the nursery walls, the empire continued its pageantry. Envoys reported that the princess was radiant, a jewel of learning and charm. None of them saw the stains on linen or the trembling hands of those who changed her bandages. Count Franz von Nopce kept a strict guard, sealing corridors and silencing whispers. Anna Nahowski wrote in her hidden journal of a child fading before her time, a child whose brilliance could not escape the prison of her body. As the seasons turned, her frailty deepened. Each winter brought longer recoveries, each spring fewer hours of strength. The palace clung to its silence, but within those walls everyone felt the weight of inevitability. Maria Eleonora lived between brilliance and suffering, a fragile flame that burned brighter as the shadows closed in. The snow of Vienna pressed against the windows of Schönbrunn. On the night Maria Eleonora crossed into her 14th year, the palace lay hushed, but within her chamber a change had begun that no curtain could hide. At first it seemed like a natural step, the sign of womanhood her governess had spoken of in whispers. Yet within moments it grew into something else. Blood spread across the sheets in a rush too heavy, a color too dark. The metallic scent filled the air, sharp and unforgiving. Elizabeth bent over her daughter, her hands trembling as she tried to blot the stain with linen. Each cloth turned crimson almost at once. Nurses hurried forward with trembling arms, pressing more fabric to the bed, their faces pale with fear. Maria Eleonora did not scream. She lay still, her eyes wide, her breath quick. She whispered with a steadiness that startled them all. "This is the moment they feared. My body will not keep its secret any longer." Dr. Eduard von Hofmann was called under the cover of night. He arrived with frost on his coat, his eyes shadowed by knowledge he could not speak aloud. He examined the girl gently, his fingers moving with precision, his voice hushed. Remedies were prepared, herbs crushed, bandages tightened. Nothing slowed the flow. He commanded silence, for even the words spoken too loudly could topple reputations. His notes would later say only that she succumbed to a sudden illness. At the door, Count Franz von Nopce kept vigil, his expression iron. Servants were driven away, and torches in the hall dimmed. He understood that one whisper of truth could bring ruin. Anna Nahowski lingered at a distance, her notebook clutched to her chest. She would not forget the sight of the Archduchess kneeling at the bedside, her gown soaked by her daughter's blood. Hours dragged on. The candles guttered low, the room heavy with prayers that went unanswered. Elizabeth pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, murmuring fragments of comfort. Maria Eleonora met her mother's eyes with a faint smile. "Do not cry for the crown I will never wear. Remember me as the voice you could not silence." Her strength ebbed slowly. Each breath came thinner than the last, her skin paling as dawn approached. The last candle gave out as her head fell gently against Elizabeth's shoulder. Silence took the chamber, broken only by the muffled sobs of a mother who had lost her child not to war or intrigue, but to the treachery of her own blood. At sunrise, the decision was sealed. The bulletin spoke of fever. The coffin was closed swiftly. The procession kept small. Official history recorded nothing of the night that had passed. Only those who had stood in that chamber carried the memory of a girl whose mind blazed even as her body failed. The morning after her death, the corridors of Schönbrunn echoed with a silence heavier than mourning. Couriers prepared official letters, each one repeating the same phrase, that Archduchess Maria Eleonora had succumbed to a sudden fever. The truth of the night was buried beneath wax seals and scripted condolences. In the archive room, Dr. Eduard von Hofmann sat with the records. He opened the folder that held Skoda's first notes, then placed it beneath a fresh report that spoke only of delicate health and a swift decline. The older pages were locked away, hidden where no minister or envoy would ever read them. Count Franz von Nopce ordered that her name be erased from the public registers of the palace. In the official family tree, a blank space appeared where her line should have continued. Portraits begun by court artists were rolled up and stored in dark vaults. The governess who had guided her lessons was dismissed quietly. Servants who had tended her were sent to distant estates. It was as if the girl had never lived, as if the promise she embodied was nothing more than a rumor that had dissolved with the snow. Anna Nahowski wrote in her hidden notebook that winter. She did not name Maria Eleonora, for names were dangerous, but she recorded the impression of a child with eyes brighter than the lamps in the corridor. She wrote of a voice that spoke of freedom even as the walls closed in. Her words were never published, but they carried forward a whisper of truth that official histories refused to keep. The Habsburg court was skilled in silence, and Maria Eleonora was not the only casualty. Across generations, there had been daughters who vanished from mention, girls whose bodies bore the cost of marriages made too close within the family. Some lived briefly in convents before fading away. Others died unnamed in infancy, their bloodlines consumed by the weakness born of repeated unions. The empire learned to treat these tragedies as shadows. They were never spoken of, yet they shaped the halls as surely as marble columns. Elizabeth never recovered. She walked the galleries with eyes fixed on portraits of children who had lived to adulthood. To her, the absence of Maria Eleonora was louder than any anthem. She kept one object hidden in her private chamber, a book of notes filled with her daughter's handwriting. When she touched its pages, she heard again the quiet declaration that thoughts cannot be chained even when the body fails. History does not list the name of Maria Eleonora. Official genealogies flow as though her branch never sprouted. Yet within the silence of Schönbrunn, the truth lingers, that a brilliant mind was extinguished not by an enemy blade, but by the inheritance of a bloodline stretched too thin. If you wish to uncover more of these hidden stories of princes and princesses erased by their own dynasties, stay with us and subscribe, for the shadows of the throne hold many secrets still waiting to be told.